So, everyone, my name is Eduardo Camargo. I'm part of the STP. Also, I'm part of some other groups that I think it's worth mentioning, like the CPC, Centro de Pesquisas Contemporâneas, which part of what I'm going to present was developed with the help or informal conversations and even on some of the meetings that we do at CPC. This research owes a lot to many of these discussions that have to do with value form theory, periodization, subjectivity production, and overall, as I understand it, it is how I can talk from a standpoint that uses both psychoanalysis and gender studies and the historicity of travestilidade, along with Marxist theory. As I understand it, I feel that these connections, they are not simply superpositions, but I'm aiming to do the mediating work between these fields. And I think this is what maybe it might be interesting to STP, seeing how I've been articulating here in STP, but also in CPC and at the new center on this mediation between different fields and also between for social dynamics and theoretical work. I think this is something that is gonna be like the nucleus of this discussion. Also, there are people that I always like to thank individually when presenting any of these related research, which is Julia Kristeva, Patricia Reed, and Cecile Malaspina, and also Bogna Corner, who were researchers which I had in this last year the opportunity to talk about this or some of the aspects of this research. They have lengthily complemented and gave me some insights into this research. Also, for the friends of CPC, Jean-Pierre Caron, Rafael Moscardi, Cássia Siqueira, and Matheus Henrique are people who have been talking like for almost 2 years about some of these questions, and also to the new Center for Research and Practice, where I believe that I had a interesting ambient and working space and studying environment to have these ideas fleshed out. I don't like to repeat presentations, but this more or less comes from another presentation that I did while I was at Rio de Janeiro recently. I was invited by Fabiano Lemos to give a short presentation on the Travafeminismo to the Contragrupo. And this was the first time that I had the opportunity to actually talk to this research on outside of let's say international space, international space, and also an academic institutional space. There are other talks that I made, even though they were some of them at institutional spaces like universities, they weren't exactly uh, along researchers. And at Contragrupo, I was between researchers from different fields, from graduation and postgraduate degrees. So it was interesting to make this presentation on what I call Travafeminismo, which is more or less the framework or the vocabulary or the sort of system that I'm trying to come up with to understand these questions regarding the production of subjectivity and late capitalism, and also a little bit of a different conception regarding trans and gender studies. I've chose this term Travafeminismo because there is already, as you know it, transfeminism, which comes from mostly queer studies. There are a lot of people working under this label who I like the work a lot, such as Elena Vieira, who's someone that even works professionally closely to Butler. And Elena has been an important voice for like intellectual and academic and research production done by travestis in Brazil. But also I believe that we have like this very banal political and overall both abstract and concrete discussion regarding about the differences, the historical differences on how the term trans comes into being and how the term travesti comes into being. They are different processes. Um, Trans, as most of you know, comes from transsexual, which later became transgender. It became transgender because of Leslie Feinberg's work, who has the book Transgender Warriors, which was the idea to change the medically pathological charged idea that transsexual had, because transsexual, even though it has changed and been positivized and redefined by the queer community abroad, it came from a very psychiatric and pathological idea of transness. And then transgender was this move to have the idea that you don't actually need to make any medical or surgical procedures so you can understand yourself as trans, that it has to do with your behavior, with how you look, and not necessarily how you administer your ways into specific institutions, especially regarding health, which is like paramount to understand institutional questions of being trans. So I chose coming from travesti, exactly because socially, when we're gonna present something regarding trans people, specifically trans feminine people, usually trans woman comes with a positive connotation, and travesti comes with a criminal connotation, like with a tragical connotation of travestis being raped or killed or committing crimes. While here in Brazil, in our media, the discursivity around trans women, it aims to be something positive. But even though it is not exactly badly intended, this creates like this um prejudicial and stereotyped idea of what is being a travesti, and there is this reclaiming of travesti, specifically because it comes from a Latin American process and historical persecution, which I'm going to get into. So this is like a master doc that I make for these visual presentations. I'm actually gonna present the first three slides, which are more or less the diagrams that I presented at WERJ to Contragrupo, and then I'm gonna go really fast through the rest of the presentation, which has some of the key quotes, which I think they are worth commenting on, because they have quotes from Simondon and Freud and Jacqueline Rose and Julian Mitchell, and how I've been trying to work with these different intellectual traditions. So the first of it, the first diagram or drawing, it's called Travafeminismo, and then you have like uh, theoretical vocabulary and social form, and you have like these arrows connecting them, forming a circuit, right? The social form, as I'm gonna argue, it gives you it rise up to how you can formalize this vocabulary and these concepts. Many of the ideas that I've been working on, they come from a close observation and experience with other travestis. So I think that this research has been pointing to maybe a non-traditional way of understanding queer studies, even though this is very common between LGBT community on how you create new meaning and value among the community. I haven't seen many people trying to exactly mediate what comes from the social form and vocabulary and experience and collectivity into a theoretical vocabulary. Usually you borrow, so you make like the other way around. You borrow some concepts maybe from Butler, maybe from Preciado, maybe from Gloria Anzaldúa, and you apply to different contexts. I'm trying to see what emerges from the social form and can inform the theoretical vocabulary. Why the theoretical vocabulary is important is exactly by something that Monique Wittig made it pretty clear And I think that Butler and Preciado try to reclaim this idea, but I don't think they make the justice of the radicalness that Wittig is coming from, which is the idea that when you develop language, when you develop new words, new concepts that are shared amongst a community, you have the stressment on agency, on individual and collective agency. You see, when you give new ways of describing phenomena, when you come up with words that might change, complement, or complicate your understanding of something, you actually have this cognitive changing. It is the idea that it's not as simple as we usually see from the vulgar take on Marx's idea on ideology that people are seeing through a view. It's more that as you construct new different forms of describing processes, and if this come from a specific standpoint, which I think is something that we can easily see in Patricia Hill Collins, Lélia Gonzalez, and Angela Davis' work, if you come from a specific standpoint and you develop these words and concepts amongst the community, you're gonna probably create a new perception about these processes. You're going to come up with a different affective and sensorial way of understanding them, because understanding, changing your understanding of it, it also helps to change how you feel about it and how you understand it and how you process it as a whole. So the idea of the importance of having like this theoretical vocabulary that I take a lot from feminism, not only, but feminism, colonial studies, Marxian thought, is because I think it can illuminate and explain how the social form and the social synthesis can occur. So I think that if we share amongst bigger and bigger groups these vocabularies, people can have not an only perception or perspective, but they have like a, a more extensive tools to understand and describe this. And also this can change not only your perception, but how you think of political action. How I work from Travafeminismo is specifically how the social form can inform the theoretical vocabulary, and how the theoretical vocabulary can also place what we call travestilidade, which we could call transsexuality, even though it doesn't translate directly. I think the struggle of feminist thought and politics has created a big, extensive box of concepts and words and frameworks, which actually help to understand how this process is carried out. Here, I'm gonna talk it very briefly because these are the different texts which I've made and how they irradiate and interconnect between them. Later, I'm gonna send a link with the specific page of this diagram and without the essays linked, so you can click and read it on your own. But basically, I think that what is at the center of what I've been thinking is an essay which you can find on my Substack, which is A Travestilidade da Trava, where I try mostly to talk both about the historical development of the travesti identity in Brazil, how something that I call cis ideology, coming from the idea of the straight mind from Monique Wittig, can reproduce some ideas of normativity or cis heterosexuality inside queer groups. And also there is theory of desire, basically based mostly on Kristeva's work on the abject, on powers of horror, which I think it doesn't come originally from me. It comes from Cel Cavalcanti, and I've been I've seen a lot of researchers who have been working with the idea of abjection now for more than 10 years. And I think it's a very worthwhile concept because it is the idea that complicates what it is, the object and subject. The abject is not an object, but it can be objectified, it can be fetishized. It's closer to the animal than it is to the object. So it is also not seen as a full-fledged subject, as a human. And I think this understanding is very crucial. So to elucidate some aspects of what is being a travesti specifically, but not only, but like you can feel it in your daily life when you're walking in public spaces, to the reactions of disgust and repugnance that come from cis people, but also the strong and violent behaviors and gestures of desire, not only but mostly from men. From there, there is the biosocial practices, which is part of the talk that I made with the Centro de Pesquisa Travesti, which it is a group that I make with some colleagues and friends here in Brazil. It has Travestis from Now of Brazil. And there we talked mostly on how not only trans people, but cis people as well are already or hormonally regulated. And you can see that easily, not only on anti-conceptional pills, like you can also see it in people that have deficit regarding hormonal production during puberty, which is very, very common. And so you have these childs that they get hormonally regulated, and I think it's important stressing that trans people are coming to the idea of the autonomy of children. It is mostly the autonomy of children that is being discussed here, because if someone is not producing, let's say, testosterone, why should that person just be compelled or pressured to do so? Why can this child choose to actually take estrogen if it prefers? So it comes to very hard and complex ethical discussions, because it deals with how much you give agency to children. Yeah, for me, I don't have an easy answer for this, but I know that the situation is not good, because you are usually pressured to use hormones in the direction of the sex that you are assigned at birth, and you might not want to do that. Like you have very rare cases such as Hunter Schafer and King Petras and other trans people that can actually get very early puberty blockers around 12 or 13, and they can avoid what is the experience of going through puberty as a trans person, which is usually very complex and dissociative. Also, radiated from there on top left, you have subversion of language, which it is a text that I don't have it translated in English right now, but I can share the Portuguese version, which I talk mostly about the genesis of travesti identity, and also Pajubá, which is a specific dialect that comes from religious places, specifically places from Candomblé and other African matrix religions and practices here in Brazil. And there Pajubá got the reference influences from French, Spanish, Italian, but also Nago, Yoruba. So you have like this linguistic code in which travestis could communicate between them, and which got like extensively popularized recently, more or less in the 2010s, I think, from so on. But it started in 1970s, and there in that essay, I parse out three three technical orders. The first technical order, it is the one of the social spaces that you can have like in the parties and the beauty contests and carnival. And then at these places, you had, and then the ballrooms, if you want to stretch that also to the international community. And those were the places where this identity here in Brazil was born, especially carnival, where people could meet and cross the boundaries of what they understood of their gender expression, on how they thought about their bodies. And from the 50s to the 60s, travesti, it comes like from travestimento, which would be more or less close to cross-dressing, and to the 70s it gets to travestilidade, which would be like, as I said, akin to transsexuality. And from there on, you have the specificity of travestis more intensely in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. The second technological order would be the idea of the how you hack or you change or you deviate from the uses of the pharmaceutical industry, such as hormones, the application of industrial silicon and other surgical and cosmetic operations and procedures, where you have a change of your body. And I think it's important stressing out, not only regarding hormones, but a lot to do with hormones, is that you're not only changing your body, as a lot of people think, but you're also changing your subjectivity. Because as your body is changing, you're not only changing how you're wiring your body, if you think of hormones, but also when you change your body, people react differently to you. And it is this different reaction from other people that can actually make it clear to you that you're changing not only as a body, but also changing as a person as a whole. And the third one, it is Pajubá, which is this dialect, which, as I explained, but Pajubá not only as this linguistic code, but also as as I call it, travesti imaginary, as all the aesthetic practices, the aesthetic figures that you have. That while we can comment on it later, but you have Chica Manicongo, which comes from colonial Brazil. You have Madame Satã, you have Roberta Close, you have Rogéria, and a lot of different travestis who sort of create models on how you can inhabit this identity, and you can try to change it specific intensely with the media, but not only. These people more they understood how to create a persona or an image or a sort of aesthetic procedure where they could change, even though that provisionally and with a lot of constraints, their actual reading and the understanding of travesti as a whole, and then become these references which are iterated by consciously more by many travestis. Going to the top, it is like second order individuation, where I work mostly with Simondon. Um, I I explain Simondon's individuation, the first order individuation, as you individuate to a subject, is the idea of the castration complex, which I'm not going to get a lot into, but as I read it through Gail Rubins, Shulamit Firestone, but also Julian Mitchell and Jacqueline Rose, the castration complex is a formalization of a process that you go through with the different functions. Like we need to understand the father and mother as functions and not as specific people. It is like functions. You can have someone enacting the the fatherly function or the motherly function, even though they are not your biological father. But it is this formalization, this myth, that can actually explain on how one enters into Lacan calls the symbolic order, but we can call it culture in Firestone's terms, and how you become a part of a culture and you become yourself a subject. That is for me the explanation that can help understanding the individual, how this process of subjectivation happens, also along with Simondon. And Simondon help. I think it helps me specifically with the idea of the collective or trans individual, which is the idea of the second order individuation happens with the collective. And I like Simonon because he is talking about the mediation, techne, technicity, technical problems, technological order is something that mediates human and its nature. When you change in a group, you're not changing um, only in a social field. You're actually nature is sort of this source on how you can make new individuations. So the idea of nature and the idea of human in Simonon, they are much more complex than we see in a lot of spaces. Mastering yourself or changing through collectivity is not exactly rejecting nature, but entering into new potentialities of what can come from nature. And I think this can be coupled very easily with the idea of desire that I talked earlier, or the idea of the uh, or the idea of how Freud understands libido or Lacan understands desire. Um, The gender consciousness at top right, it is a text where I talk mostly, and who people who went to the Sapa Travas talk saw a little bit of it, which is the idea of seeing gender as a specific real abstraction that occurs more or less similarly to how Sonhero says, but I think that how Rubin worked, which is adjusting Freud and Lacan to Levi-Strauss to look to many groups which are not Occidental groups, right? She's looking to groups that are non-Western groups. So she's is showing how these mechanisms of taking individuals and projecting them into culture and producing these subjectivities have a lot of variation, but they have more or less a similar process, even in very different contexts. Um, so I think that Wittig also comes great here, and I think she can be coupled with Sonhero as well, which is the idea that if you mobilize, or if you go towards the idea that if you come and use the knowledge that was produced, it doesn't matter if this knowledge was produced in a capitalist environment or a patriarchal environment. It can be scientific knowledge, even if it comes from postulates which are actually very oppressive. If you create this vocabulary, if you instigate the experience of collectivity, of being, for example, you had the consciousness groups in the second wave, where a lot of women would come and talk about their daily life experiences, and there, seeing the differences in their lives, they could map out what they had in common, what affected all of them. So having these sort of groups studying, sharing, and creating these political spaces, I think, can foster a gender consciousness where you understand more or less the processes of how gender is reproduced. And also you have like travas etéreas, which would be more or less ethereal trannies, which I'm gonna talk very briefly because I also have uploaded this talk in Portuguese on CPT's YouTube channel, but it's the idea that the binary, as we understand the opposites, going through Anaximander and Heraclitus, is the idea that the opposites and the binaries come from the idea of indetermination. And I got there through how Heraclitus talks about the aperon, which was presented to me through Cecile. And I was very interested in the idea that the aperon is both the cause of the destruction of the world and its reason to be. I think this poetic formulation is very good, and the idea of how indetermination can always actualize the binary or change the norm or change the different procedures is something that it is deeply entrenched into the debate of the cosmogony, and also the whole foundation of what we call Western society. So I give a look to the idea of the aperon, thinking travestis as a sort of manifestation of the aperon, and thinking about the parallels that we have between the third category. The third category, it is a conception of gender which is not male or feminine, or male or female, woman or man, but is the third gender, which is described by Aristophanes in the Symposium. And there he gives us a little a short myth on how Eros comes actually from dividing these beings which were the third gender, and they are related to the cult of the moon and Selene. And then you have like a lot of different mythical figures, which inclusively the Moira are also related to it. But you have like these different iterations on how you already have this description in a mythical and philosophical register about ideas of prophecy, indetermination, chaos, necessity, contingency, and they mostly have to do with sex gender perception that is neither male nor female. And finally, this is the last diagram, which is more or less the upper part that comes from Marx and goes to xenofeminism and back to Marx. It is how I work with a specific feminism arc, which I call like technological feminism. So you would have like Marx, and then Marcuse, and then Shulamit Firestone, Donna Haraway, cyberfeminism, gender accelerationism, and xenofeminism. And how I'm trying to tie it back to Marx, because I think that coming back to Marx is important to understand this, both because you have like this very good and description of different social processes in Marx, and also because I think that the production of identity and subjectivity is closely tied to the functionings of late capitalism. So I go back to from Xenofeminism through Socrates, Hesiod, Orpheus, Kant, Hegel, Freud, Simonon, Weil, Rubin, Kristeva, Lélia Gonzalez, Eduardo Glissam, Monique Wittig, Sylvia Wynter, and Son Hattel. Silver Winter is at the end, and Sonata is kind of crossing it specifically because I think it's a very good idea of having social reproduction tuned in with value farm theory. But Sylvia Winter for me is like one of the greatest thinkers of all time, and I think that her complexification of the idea of sociology by Fanon going to the sociogenic principle is a very good idea to understand how these different cultural impositions or historical formations they get also internalized by people, because Winter has this description both of the biological apparatus and what she calls the internal reward system, which would be the idea that you get more stressed when you're not conforming to norms, but you actually get alleviated when you are. So she talks about how these social norms they get internalized through learning as a child, as observing through different ego mechanisms, where you get, for example, if you read Neuza Santos Souza or Silver Winter or Lélia or Fanon, you're gonna see about the white ego and the black myth, and that I'm taking from Neuza Santos, which is the idea that you have this myth with all the fetishization around black population, and but you are internally aiming at the white ego, which would be more or less conforming to the expectations of what was understood as the white people. So I think this is very zoomorphic and analogous to how we describe gender processes, and it is how I try to understand cis ideology and the idea that trans people can internalize and reproduce gender behavior, which is actually harmful for us, because the ideal that we are striving for is actually a cis ideal, an unattainable ideal. It is the idea that we are gonna get to a place where we are actually respected or passable or understood, but you can't reach that place. You are always giving up something to get to that place. You're always adequating and modeling yourself in a very violent way. I'm gonna go really fast. I think that from what I talked from Simondon, I need to get more into it. Here's Roberta Close, which is something someone very important to talk about. And you have like this international newspaper saying sizzling model is a man who wants to be a woman. So this is like very didactic to understand on how travestis were understood during Roberta's close time, which was like mostly the 80s. She's someone famous until today, but she wasn't sexual icon during the 80s and the 90s. And here she's she's 27, and she is gonna make the new vagina, the sex assignment surgery, and it is the idea of still of travestilidade, which ties to transsexuality, that you need to actually get the surgery so you can understand yourself as a transsexual, even a travesti transsexual. This was like an indication of anyone that wants to get a very contemporary perception of this, which is called Bicha Travesti, the documentary on Linda Quebrada. Here is Alexandre Frota and Roberta Close in the 1984, when she was the Rainha da Bateria of the Carnaval in Rio. So it is very interesting look at this phenomenon, because Roberta was a sexual icon right before Operation Tarantula, which was the hunting of travestis during the HIV crisis with the idea that travestis were prostitutes, so they were infecting people with venereal diseases and specifically HIV. And right before this happened, Roberta was becoming like the section icon of the 80s. Um, Let me go like real fast that I will just want to get to something of the idea. Oh, so you have like during Operation Tarantula the abject travesti, which is the idea, the invasion of travestis, and this is like documented by a lot of newspaper and TV, and it is this that creates socially and collective the idea of travesti as a criminal, or someone that is abject, or someone that is demonic. You have like a lot of these negative associations that come in specifically from this period. And Roberta presented a different perception on travestilidade, which was the glamorous travesti, or the travesti that could become a model, that can become a model or a fashion icon, and actually rise up into the social ranks. This can help you individually, but it is like representation politics. It never helps everyone. It helps a little. Just some people can actually get to this place. Most of them can't, and it becomes sort of a model of what you need to follow. I think that what Roberta did is completely understandable in her time and period, and she's a very cunning and smart person. But people can take the individual cases as political models, because that usually doesn't guarantee any collective effectivity. So you have this very Simondonian phrase by her: I don't need an operation already operated by nature, which also shows me that travestis always dealt with these conceptions of nature, not as negating nature. I think that xenofeminism tries to complexify, but it doesn't go to a very good direction, because it says that if nature doesn't just change nature, and I understand what they're describing, but I prefer to say that the sort of feminism, as I understand it today, is not about rejecting or simply change nature, but it's coming to a different interaction with it, because you have the cases of intersex people, because you can look at other species where the question of sex is much more complex and mutable. Of course, you can change nature, but you don't need to put it exactly on a chaotic place. I think that nature has a logic of its own, and it's not very easy to access it, but you can experiment with it harmonically without it being like a ingenious or naive perception of nature. I think it's actually more complex to understand nature under these Darwinian terms as something dynamic and complex, and like this cooperative evolution, that social forms and behavior also change genetic processes, and seeing these things that are like as two forms as similar, that are tied together through a circuit. Here, what I call the fetish circuit. So we can say that travesti, it is both. It feeds on being abject, which would be like a prostitute, a criminal, and demonic, or it is a model, a sexual icon, and Luciferian. I call it Luciferian because I feel that Lucifer, maybe since the Baroque, but mostly from Romantic painting, become more of androgynous figure. It left behind that more devilish animal representation, and actually became a representation of beauty, of the morning star. And I think that Luciferian, because you still carry part of the abjection with you, even though you can be pretty and desirable, you can't actually purge out of the demonic side and input that comes with this identity. I'm just going fast here because I want to get through some parts. Oh, okay. Going to Marx, I think it is very important of talking about Marx. Why? Um, this is part of the presentation that I actually made for CBC, where we talked about, and me and Bruno Bellin talked about accelerationism and Lenianism, and I gave a little insight, I gave some insights on how accelerationism and gender studies had developed cooperatively. And since accelerationists claim Marx as a part of their genealogy, I think that on the fragment of the machines and how Mackenzie works talks about the metabolic rift, it is interesting to understand what that changing the system of production and reproduction, changing the infrastructure of how things work, the platform, the technological aspect, you also provoke a change in the human that is social, epistemic, and technological. That is, you are changing actively the conception of human when you change also the social structure there and the economic structure around it. This is the arc that I described earlier of Firestone as like the first coming there, like with a sort of Marcusian conception on some aspects, but she's gonna go through Marx to understand this as well. And she is the creator of radical feminist that today is very far away from its origins. I jump her way because I think we have already most people already talked extensively about her, and I think that Sage Plant specifically is a very good development into this because she's talking both about chromosomes, about matrices, about the idea of how different practices that came from the past, like embroidering and dealing with texture matters, they were like socially done by women. And she then compares the development of the machine and the algorithm, specifically using Ada Lovelace and Alan Turing to understand how the development of technology also parallels the development of the social place of the women. There is xenofeminism, which I also don't think we need to get into, and also gender accelerationism that comes later from xenofeminism and tries to like make this claim more or less on Lenianism, which xenofeminism goes more through narrow rationalist route. And then finally, I think that to be serious, I think the developments between men's right activists and men's movements, it comes a lot as a reaction, as a psychic reaction to the bigger space being like institutional, political, or artistic. I think trans people have been claiming and gaining these spaces into quote unquote democratic spaces. But I think it is like a male hysteria what we're seeing. The thing of the coaches and these guys such as Varoufakis, Emilianopoulos, and Joe Rogan, even Elon Musk, and even Land now, they all seem to me like very afraid on how trans people, and I think that travestis are at the edge of this, as I think I've defended here. But I think they are like really scaring their and shitting their pants with this. Like they are scared shitless because they feel like you can't avoid that. And my example was you can't avoid that, and how can that can be like capitalistic and not very liberating is like Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson, who is trying to get immortal through taking estrogen and making blood transfusions with his parent and son, and like he's making use of techniques and technological and cosmetic procedures which were developed by trans people. This is being like consciously appropriated and used by billionaires now so they can extend their lives and change their bodies. And I think that this perception that the future is more androgynous and that the gender expression and gender functions, sexual functions are getting more complex is what is making this whole red pill circuit this like more, let's say that trans people are more cyber positive, and Letícia Cesarino made a very good thread today about cyber positive, going through Gregory Bateson's perception of it and the development of different like organs and mutations by the presence of parasites in different species. And I think that like trans people are cyber positive, and these guys they want to be cyber negative because they want to make this process where everything gets more authoritarian and extreme and fascistic. And I think that fascism is scary now because it can code itself. It is fashion, but it can claim, well, I'm only working and fighting for my family. I'm only making that for religion. I'm only making that for work. only make that for natural order, which are all fascistic to keep compromises, but they are seen more as gender preserving tactics than actual fascism. Here's Brian Johnson and his father and son. They are like I don't know, they look like vampires to me. And my answer to all these, then finally, it would be Travecoseno, which would be the idea of reclaiming this place of the Aperon and thinking of these different static procedures, which, as I like to call it, coming from the travesti word, to travecar, to like to hack into it in a travesti way and to change the different perceptions regarding, and this can be done like in culture or science or many ways. I put here like the Primo Cthulhu from Haraway because Team of the Trouble was very important for me to start thinking about the Anthropocene, and the idea, of course, of the spiders comes from Operation Tarantula, but also Aristophanes' tale talks about four arms and four legs, and I also think that arachnid myth is also very transcoded or transintending. And finally, the last slide, it is a Simondon quote, which is everything that has the capacity to individuate has specific qualities. Humans have the capacity to enter into a second order individuation, the collective social body. Natura naturans, natura natural. And it is this that I thought of presenting to you guys today. You guys want to take five, maybe? Like 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea just to keep on with the habit, right? Of 5 minutes before the debate. Is that okay?
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah, I think so. Is everyone back?
I'm not hearing you, Gabriel. I
Can you
don't know
hear
if
me
it's a
now?
problem on my computer.
Can you
Uh,
hear me?
well,
I,
let me see if it is my phone's.
can, can you hear me, Eduardo? Or is
Yes.
How about now?
Yeah.
okay.
So, any questions, guys? Gabriel knows I went to Rio and I talked a lot about this in the last few weeks. So, um, I'm curious to what you have to say. Like when I at these places, like different spaces, it is always I think the questions are the most interesting part because like everyone here as a researcher knows that you sort of recycle themes and ideas and concepts, and even though you can make like a different talk every time, you are always with the same questions. What I think it's always different is the questions that you receive. And as Gabriel witnessed in my last talk at Rio, I think it was both interesting to have like academics and also researchers and also people that weren't researchers. Like it was good to have trans people coming from a more personal perspective, and also having the more conceptual ideas of different researchers. So I think that anything is actually worthwhile. Yeah, Renzo.
Yeah, I can try to kickstart because I mean it was thanks for the presentation. I hoped you could go on and like there were many slides I wanted to hear what it was about. But I mean two initial questions that crossed my mind. So one would just be I want to hear more because from on you have the text on the Trinitarianism, the Trinity of I don't remember how it's called, but you talk about the abject that you presented again and the glamour, but you you say it's actually like 3 points, and I, it
Yes.
was about the third one, how you reproduce even in trans spaces, like, but I wanted to hear from like understand better why you think these are like three sort of poles, or
Okay.
is that a thing? And the second thing also, because you mentioned like what kind of emancipation, right? Are we what kind of horizon and how certain horizons that are put forward are sort of like rely on a sort of like cis or sort of like an idealized or sort of like unreachable sort of. And I wanted to know whether you think that the sort of like the formulations from STP on could help on that, on like this idea of defining a sort of like emancipatory logic on the capacity of like uh, allowing more stuff to figure in the world, or this idea of the richness of sizes of worlds, whether this is a way that could help defining some sort of like emancipatory direction versus like it's very clear how like masculinist spaces are about reducing, right, the space, the sort of like social maps that you're available to talk about like what a man is and what a woman is. They're always trying to come back to like very like unidimensional, so it fits quite like clearly how it's about to make it poorer, like the grammar. So yeah, that's my two questions.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen real fast where I can show the division of the text that I said, and I'll send it here too, so you guys can see it. Can you see it? Is
Yeah,
it
I see
visible?
it.
Okay, so you have these different sections in this text, which I call like the different the subtitle is the different positions of desire in relationship with cis women and trans people, because this the motivation from this text was actually very personal in the sense that I was having these perceptions on how some trans people reproduce this behavior, specifically through my experience with affective and romantic and sexual relationship with other people in São Paulo. So I wanted to think, well, if this happens inside the trans community, if we are not immune to do this, why does this happen? And the first place I would say it is like here, the phallic girl as a vehicle of desire, abjection and jouissance, two sides of erotic game, and which is more or less what I talked about, how it comes in Kristeva and how it can manifest it in like aesthetic perceptions or social perceptions with the profane, with the demonic, with the Luciferian. And I think that this abject social reading or status, it changed qualitatively with Roberta, in the sense that Roberta presented individual strategy of claiming the higher class and elite spaces. Like if you, I have the first Playboy, which was cover of magazine in 1984. Yeah, and there you have this quote saying that all of the vanguards in Brazil respect and want to be next to her. So she's not a prostitute. She's actually a model that even models for Thierry Mugler. So she's into high fashion. And this idea, it is like the idea of glamour that is developed like Pelucio talks about it, but it is like conceptualized by Maria Shoa, which is the idea that travestis and even cis women can sort of create a social ascension, an individual ascension through the adoption of very feminine and like elite signs. So the thing that about Roberta being funny and also smart, but being very cunning, is how you can see that I can talk about this in some ways about myself, on how I'm close to the art circuit, even I'm not very active in it. I occupy the art circuit and unusually respect there. I occupy institutional spaces. So I can understand that if I want to be more accepted in specific situations, if I play to certain gender and social expectations, I know this is going to be easier. I know that if I reproduce something of different behaviors that I've learned in my contact with femininity, I can actually be a part of this, even that if it is provisionally or in specific situations. It might be easier for me to be there, even though this is like a very unstable status to occupy. And the last space, it would be like the heterosexual ideology and the maintenance of normative behaviors in trans spaces. So the last position that I say, it is exactly the position of heterosexuality. The idea that you have even between other travestis, that in order to be a travesti, you actually need to be a heterosexual, in the sense that you need to be first previously a gay boy, and then when you transition, you become heterosexual because you are relating yourself with men. You don't have a lot of lesbians which are travestis. You have some now, but like for years you have like this idea that because of the social role and pressure of being a prostitute or being a model or being into the fashion and cosmetic world, you are actually an heterosexual women, because the model of travesti is being modeled after a very specific idea of femininity. So for me, the last position, the third position, is exactly the maintenance of heterosexuality, which through a Wittigian lens, and I said that in the talk on Partisan, it is the idea that for the maintenance of the species, you can you reinforce the idea of heterosexuality, but it's not only the maintenance of the species. Maybe the core of the reactionary argument, the traditional argument, is that, well, you can be gay because you're going after what the species want. But if you read Darwin closely, you know that you don't need to be exactly productive in the sense of making everything that's functional and quote unquote pragmatic for the species. Actually, you can have non-normative behavior, and this can change the rest of the behavior in the species, being human or not. So I think that the core of the argument of the conservatives, it is that you need to be hetero so you can maintain the reproduction of the species. But the argument of the feminists is that you don't need to be that, because you can use technology to have like artificial wombs, or the transplantation of wombs, or like in the talk that I gave at the Colloquium Mondon, which is recorded, Thiago Novaes talked about a lot of different insemination ways. You know, you have different techniques of insemination. You can inseminate semen with semen, or eggs with eggs now. You don't even need, like at a biological level, to have like a female or male partner to produce a human. So I think that what is strong on Hathaway, and you can sorry, in Firestone, and but actually in Hathaway and Sage Plan, is that you don't need the maintenance of the species by heterosexuality. And this is something that Vitry talks a lot also, that it is, well, heterosexuality is not something from nature. It is like the social imposition that uses and naturalizing in essential arguments, which gives the idea that you need a family and you need heterosexuality to maintain all of the other social order. And I think this is very hard to talk even in travesty spaces, because it's a very entrenched conception. Yeah, to all of us, because if you it is like what Mark said about the technology. If you change the different ways that production happens, and also distribution, you're changing a human. If you change the ways that we reproduce ourselves as a species, you're actively contesting the given ideas of human. And I think that's why it is so scary to actually point out that heterosexuality is artificial as any other form of sexuality, but it's usually mostly used to reinforce like imposition, historical impositions of oppression and sexism. And regarding the other part, I think that this is also something that I talked in Partisan. I think Intelligent said to me that, well, what you're saying is more or less that what Lukács says about the proletariat being the subject of the history. And I think that the travesti and other minorized groups that access that, in the sense that you're so alienated from the condition of what is understood as a human. I think this is very clear in Fanon and Civil Winter. You're so pushed out from the what is expected to be human. The institutions don't see you as that. The institutions see you as something else. People in your daily life see you as something else. You're so violently pushed away that you can have like this privileged vision of what is happening, because you're so outside of the norm that you can actually grasp the functioning of the norm at a bigger distance. So I think, and what I want to actually to work both in CPC and STP in the next year is exactly how the production of these identities have to do with the periodization of theses. I think this is very akin, you know, like if you, the contradictions of late capitalism are more evident in the third world, as the contradictions of gender are more evident in travesties. Exactly, because you're very distant from the norm. You're very distant from the center. So the further that you are from what is producing, what is expected, and the normalcy of these ideas, the best you have a perception of why this is so contradictory and constructed. This is more or less what I think that we could, of course, this needs mediation and to be worked out, but this is more than insight that I have to do with that. And the things with the regarding value form theory, I think that Rubin is very good on that, and also Irigaray, because Irigaray talk about women as talking commodities. But I also think that you can't get that only from a Marxian framework. You need to actually go to Marcel Mauss and to anthropologists to see how gift works, and how, because women, as Rubin argues in the traffic of women, were part of the first commodities, even in non-capitalist societies. Like you can see that in Levi-Strauss. So to make filiation, you trade off women. You do that to preserve the ties between the different ethnic groups and to make different lineages. So women, they become a commodity prior to capitalism. And to actually understand how this production happens and how the social circuit happens regarding women, you actually need to look at economia da dádiva and gift economy, so you can get an understanding of that. That is not only Marxism, but that's something that I'm doing now. So it's not very worked out a lot, but I think this more or less can tie with the frameworks of the STP. The idea is that I think what I'm talking about, gender gives you a good lens to understand both how social reproduction happens in an individual level and then in a macro level. I would say that this scalar perspective can help understand the social dynamics as a whole. Yes, Gabriel?
First of all, I apologize if you start hearing a furadeira. It's because there's like there's a like I don't know how to say it, obra here at my place, so it's possible it just gets really noisy. The first thing I wanted to, I mean, there's so much stuff that you brought up and so many different paths that I feel like without like I wanted to hear you talk a bit more about how you see the political movement. I mean, what is going on that you find is relevant and where problems are appearing? Because I think that would help kind of help to choose which questions then to pursue later, because there are so many places we could go in the conversation. So if you could talk a bit more about what you think it's interesting that is going on, which type of political actors you find that are, let's say,
okay,
moving in an interesting direction.
I think we're in a deadlock, actually, because identity politics has made a lot of good things for people, like structural changes, which were necessary. But the logic of representation politics is trapping us. And like we can see on how the whole idea of the consensus that you have of the population of this is usually negative, because it is what happens, for example, with Erika Hilton. Erika Hilton is a great politician. I like her work a lot, but you see that people are hoping, as it happens to all sort of representation politics, they're hoping her to change everything. You see that progressive people usually put a lot of faith in her. So the idea, people like her or Bowles or other left politicians, I think they play an important part. But the problem with people that come from minorized groups is that they're taking as models and they're sort of taking as saviors as well. That is not on them. When you had like the prohibition on gay marriage in Brazil, a lot of people were, oh, yes, Erika, go there, solve that. And I was like, well, why aren't we pressuring other progressive politicians so they do so? Why are we hoping that Erika can carry out the change by herself? I mean, that's too much on her. You see, you even have these memes like, oh, Deputy Erika is going to take care of that, and like I'm grateful that she's doing that. But also this creates amongst LGBT and progressive fields sort of a less radical way of making politics, because they think that only voting for the sort of candidates is going to solve the problems. But we know that like Erika is a good politician amongst many that are actually very bad. And so she can make the changes out by herself. I think that's a deadlock that's very hard to face, because we can't play down the numbers of people making this sort of politics, this institutional politics, but we also need to foster something that is different. And in this way, I feel like I'm very unfortunately pessimistic. I try to make what I think that it is good politics, in the sense of trying to create this platform for travestis, but not taught for travestis, so travestis can like have better education, better access to work, so we can think between us about not only about politics, but about like theoretical or philosophical or political or any sort of questions. But I think it's so hard to make this a bigger thing, because usually most left spaces, they're not very welcoming to trans people, and not only trans people, but non-white people as well. So we see that like this fragmentation and this tariff wave, you have this strong, this is like what scares me the most, seeing a lot of women which are actually they are like supporting reactionary politics without even noticing at times. They think they're preserving a specific status of womanhood and making like a very good political move, but you know, they have the same arguments as the far right in the whole world. Like they're playing up to J.K. Rowling. Is this gonna be your political voice? I mean, it doesn't seem to be a very good one. So I feel that we need actually to create, if possible, to make like political spaces which can be welcoming to these people and to like radical leftist thought. And this is very hard to do right now. I feel like we are very fragmented.
So if I understand correctly, the place from which you're starting to think it's more of this deadlock, from this deadlock of where you see the political moment right now, right? Like that there is this underlying
From where?
deadlock.
Sorry?
From, if I
Yes,
understood
yes, I
correctly,
see
the
from this
deadlock.
deadlock.
Okay.
I think that, like, for example, you have like these NOGs here in Brazil and these places that they receive trans people in situation of precarization, and they make great political work, but they are entrapped. They don't have the resources to get bigger. And also because of the inside conflicts of the left, it's usually like that, the LGBT community for itself, and then, you know, racialized groups for themselves, and then like very provisionary and occasional alliances.
Okay.
You know, you have them communists with the communists, and black people with black people, and trans people with trans people. And I don't know how to get out of that. I mean, I think that we need to create, even in a micro level, spaces where all these people can be together.
Sure.
I think
Okay,
this
so
is
now,
like
okay, so now I think I can ask a more specific question because, okay, a two-part question. One is more of a provocation. The other is like a very down-to-earth conjunctural issue. But the first is because, like, from outside, I'm one thing that I always, for example, I think we come from different places in this. Like, I personally, there are two big moments in Marx where he talks about machines. One is the fragment of machines, which becomes an important thing for accelerationist thinking. The other is in Capital, right? And there is a slight difference there, and I think you raised the point in a nice way, because in the Grundrisse, when he talks about the fragmenting machines, it does look like technical knowledge, technical change comes first, and this changes subjectivity, right? There's like a paragraph that has that idea. In Capital, you get a story that is inverted because people start cooperating in a machine-like way. And because social relations have the form that looks like machines, Babbage, who ran a factory, started seeing people in a way that would lead him to the technical development of machinery, right? Of systems of machines. So there is no technology that can be adhered before social relations are already of that form, which is something that happens even with money. It's a version of this story that is more coherent with value form, because money could only have appeared once commodities behaved money-like. So
you're
first
thinking like close to Son Hato in this
it could be,
proposition.
yeah, but I think it's like, anyway, regardless of who said it, I think there are two stories in that direction, what between cause and consequence, right? Why is it that I tend to think that the second story, the Capital story, where machine comes after social relation, is important? Because there is a funny thing, and then that's the provocation. There's a funny connection between what was called left Hegelians, which is people who are on the left of Hegel, but they were Hegelians, meaning ultimately, you know, reason and this is always a bit of a state. It's always a bit of a matter of building new rules, constructing a new legal system. And funny enough, there is a similarity between the trust in Erika Hilton, which is the trust in the institution, which is in the trust that we can bypass direct social relations because the state is going to implement a certain policy, and a certain trust that if we change the technology, it might change social relations. You see, like, it's different. Of course, I agree it's different.
I agree with you, but I think that feminist thought that kind of problematizes. When I present, I talked very briefly about Firestone, but I think she's good in this, in the sense that And I think that Simondon complicates that as well. I think that I might agree with the second thesis, but I think it kind of goes to a part of Marx where the alienation doesn't get that interesting as it can be. You know,
Okay,
I
so
think it kind of put this accent on the human, which I think it's more complex than that. And I think that Simondon complexifies that. Vinicius recently has shared like something which is like actually the labor is part of the technical process, and not that work the technical process is work, you know. And I think that if we look at I can go after the poll with time, but like if you look at the discussion of techne in Plato and Aristotle, we can see that we have like the
okay,
technical, it is a very, it's more complex, I would say, than this presentation of Marx.
okay, I'm not I don't want to discuss who said what, because there are so many authors. I just wanted to say, like, the polemic I wanted to hear your comment on is that it does seem sometimes that there is an option that some strategic options take, which is, if we focus on this thing which is not, I mean, you can call it whatever way you want to say, it's not necessary or it's immediate. It's like human relations, the human whatever. But you take some other path, which allows us to bypass a certain type of problem because it just will scale
Okay.
up more quickly.
I think that the
So
aspirationists are too
so my
technical, euphoric in this sense. I agree
okay,
with
so
you.
my point is, like, the technology and right, the technology and the state both offer similar ways to bypass a particular problem. This is my second question to you, which is, it does seem that part of, as you say, certain contradictions are clearer from this particular standpoint. There does seem to also be a heightened class composition contradiction or conflict that makes also the fragmentation, perhaps. I wanted to hear if you think that's true or not, that there is a greater class homogeneity within trans
Okay.
movement or not, and if this is also one of the reasons why something that bypasses, focus
Okay.
on human relations might also make it easier to scale.
I think that both accounts of Marx can actually give a very cybernetic or circuitous way of understanding, in the sense that we can emphasize one point or the other, but I think we can't parse them out completely. You know, I think that the technical or technological developments, they are changing the way that people relate to each other, of course. But I think this is where politics play a part. That you can consciously, collectively say, let's go to that direction. I think that this is more what Firestone says. That say, well, broadly, we have divided on two modes of understanding, like production and the world, which is the aesthetic and the technological mode. And the technological is usually assigned to order and unity and to man, and the aesthetic world is assigned to nature and sensibility and women. And if you come to a society, it is very speculative. She doesn't have all the processes together, but the idea is, if you make like a communist revolution, socialist government, we can call it as we want. If you get in this revolutionary process and you aim at abolishing gender, then you don't have these divisions in culture, which goes back what I said about Anaximander and Heraclitus. Like the binary opposition comes from the indeterminacy, from something that is always actualized, from something that is not as divided. Like the opposite and the binaries come from an idea of chaos, of parsing out what comes before and after. So for her, when it is a very Marcusian answer, we can say like that maybe that's insufficient, and I would agree. But it's the idea that if you change the repressions that come from the state in a communist project, then you don't get this logic. This, in the case of Marcuse, you don't get this thanatos, death, production, capitalist oppression. And for Firestone, it is the same. The abolition of gender would be the abolition of these divisions inside culture as well. And I think this is a good answer. And when you say that, like higher class, I don't know, maybe lower class, actually. It is something that Sylvia Winter describes very well. I can send the essay later, but it has like 50 pages. It is like a very long and dense, but you have like these sections where it's basically, well, the Hebrews had to create a sort of understanding, which was their Bible, during Moses, to get away from the oppression that they were going through the Pharaoh, because they were at the bottom of the pyramids. So they could look at the whole structure. It is a very visual analogy or vision. Like if you're at the bottom of the pyramid, you can look from the bottom to the top, and then you can, if you're out there, like of course you can look back, but it's a different perception.
Yeah,
It
but
is an
just to
inverted
clarify, my
perception.
question wasn't to say in no way that there is like a homogeneous higher class composition. My point was, is it a homogeneous versus heterogeneous composition, in the sense that
Oh, okay.
it brings together many because even within the working class, there are so many social strata.
Yes,
It's
yes.
heterogeneous. It's a matter of homogeneity versus heterogeneity of class composition, and not of being higher up. I mean, I wouldn't be that naive, but like, so it's a matter of heterogeneity or not? What do you think?
Oh, I think like the travesti is a good model for the self, both because the thing of the transition makes you question a lot what it means to be you, like, you know, like, oh, I was born that and I learned that, but I don't feel like that, and like my previous experiences don't place me there, and I feel like it's very usual to people to usually being negatively recognized first and then recognizing yourself, you know. Like, for example, you are a child and then you are a queer child or a gay child or a silent child or a timid child, and like, you know, a shy child, and then you get like other by your peers. Like your peers, they perceive prior you that you're different from them, and then you're other, and then you don't have like the words to like describe this, and then later you actually meet other people that have a similar experience, and then you claim yourself that identity, you know, like you're first recognized as something other, and then you take that for you and you positivize in a way and you externalize, and then go get us into the circuit. So I think it's interesting in this way, but I think that because of the historical process of like being a working class, working with prostitution, and also, you know, having very precarity, living with precarity, and also being composed very ethnically diverse. I think like there are many non-white travestis in Brazil. We can like talk about the reasons of that. I don't have a single answer, but while I see that many trans women from the north, not all of them, of course, a lot of them are white. I feel in Brazil this is much more complex. So I feel the racial debate, because of Pajubá and the persecution, also creates like this racial conscious. You know, the raciality is discussed among travestis, and it is placed, and you know, you can see the diversity. So I feel that the thing, class, and race, and even sexuality, sexual well worked out amongst us, but it's very discussed and perceived. And I think that this helps to understand that it is like a group that values heterogeneity, because transition has to do with an open up with to the new and to the experience and to a more or less heterogeneous perception of yourself. It was that, Gabriel.
No, it makes sense. It's just that but we can talk more about this later on. I don't want to monopolize the conversation. It's just that for me, sometimes it's hard to track the movement from descriptive to something almost, I mean, more, I don't say the word is ontological, but more a capacity that's built into. So it goes from a position in a social conjuncture. So, for example, is it more heterogeneous right now? For example, this is a conversation that a lot of, you know, fractions of the Black movement have to have, which is how class is intersecting with race in ways that sometimes heighten tensions rather than diminish tensions. It's just an aspect of the times, and not necessarily intrinsic,
Yes,
right?
yeah. I feel that like politically it's very homogeneous, you know, to the media and to most people. I feel that like inside the intra community, inside the community, the travestis, it's obvious that it is heterogeneous. Specifically because we have like our inside beefs and problems with other travestis. And I think that when you have this encounter with a travesti, like, you know, we're such precarized group that you hope, like unconsciously, to find identification with other travestis, right? And then you meet a lot of them that have nothing to do with you, but you meet some that has. And then I think that this inside dynamic makes clear for us that we are very different amongst ourselves. But I think that to the media and as a whole, we are seen as a very homogeneous group, because more or less we're gonna go through a similar social reading, which is like that fetish circuit. You are either seen as abject or glamorous, and you can oscillate between these two poles, but you are more or less being treated, and this depends, of course, in class and race and sexuality. You are treated more or less in the same way. And this is why I claim the word traveco, because I feel that in the last consequence for the Brazilian population is that it doesn't matter how you look or you behave. Like, most people are gonna see you as a traveco, which is this lure, like, which is to tranny, so it's the idea that most people, they are homogenizing you in your social reading, but amongst us and maybe in other queer spaces, it is obvious that it's not as homogeneous as it seems.
I I if no one like I have a sort of follow-up on this discussion that I'm and thinking about, I mean, this question, this point that Gabriel made about the bypassing of truth via the state, and trying to think a bit in terms of like the Karatanis mode, I think. I feel you talked about like how this, you call it technical spaces, but like there are many of these sort of like dynamics of trans spaces that it's sort of political richness is a lot to do of, I think, you can think it of in terms of mode of like this sort of like richness of sociality, but then you have the problem of like how do you scale up, right? This and mode has a sort of like problem with scaling up, right? And it appears that indeed the state appears as this sort of like historical sort of like alavanca that sort of like scales up the movement in both in terms of like organization, but a lot to do with this sort of like representative logic that you talked about. Like, if you have someone up there, it can stand for us. So it's like this way to bypass this. It's not that we have to, everyone must grow. We just need to elect one of us, and that scales up by itself. So it's this sort of like state logic. But then, so yeah, I'm curious of like how this could happen via mode C, like thinking of in terms of the sort of like material reproduction and this way. And I just came to my mind like which I think is very interesting. Maybe want to hear of you about. It's like spaces like Mamba Negra, in which it, yeah, I'm not sure, but I mean, it would, I think, be super interesting case study. But there's this scene I feel it's not scaling up just in terms of like representation logic, right? It's not just about, it has many things built up in terms of like, I think it's more complex than that. That's what I'm saying. And it also has to do with like sort of economic access to the tickets. It has to do with, like this shift towards funk, in which you get people which are not only like tied to more like university circles, but also to like suburbs and communities and favelas. Sort of like there's an increasing social heterogeneity and class heterogeneity, which I think you cannot explain only in terms of this reproduction logic, that I feel that what makes these spaces like Mama Negra interesting, and they have this sort of like scaling capacity, which is very impressive. So yeah.
I feel that you've nailed in mode A, mode B. Like, I would agree to, like, in more internal trans spaces, you have like a lot of this exchange. Even like I know some people that do that, not all of them, but I do it myself. Like, I'm having a good, for example, I'm professionally good right now, so I'm making good, and then I help financially my friends as I can, and I feel that is very strong amongst trans circles. Like in a way, you can help someone financially, professionally, effectively. You know, I feel that there's this very strong, even though we have our differences, it's very hard to not have like a travesti that has their own group, which they can more or less go through all these things. And I agree with you that like Erika and other travestis in politics, they are like in this mode beat that you have this person trying to being asked to solve everything. And to mode C, well, Renzo, I think you know that my ex is the creator of Mamba Negra, so it is a little bit of a personal subject, but I think that yes, like the thing that I see in Mamba, and like let's say what I accompanied more closely now living in São Paulo was actually on the entering. Like since Jota Mombassa's career from the 2010s on, but most intensely from 2016 on, which I think it has to do in the music as well with Lin and Jupi, and that has a lot to do with Mamba. But I feel that in the art circuit, a lot of travestis were entering because they were in the academy, like during the 2005 from on. You know, you have like a lot of travestis in like mostly theater graduation, but also in cinema, in social sciences. So you have like this first intense generation of travestis being graduated and participating of these circles. And when I entered university in 2014, it was already a strong debate inside the university. You know, trans identities and this queer perception that comes from the travesti was happening intensely inside the university. And I feel that this promoted after 2014 and mostly from 2016 on, a very strong entering of travestis into the art circuit, even the foreign art circuit. If you look, for instance, at Berlin's Biennale, you're going to see like Castel Vitorino participating for like the second or third time now. So you have this strong entering of travestis in the art circuit, in the intellectual circuit, and I think this can also make some changes, but they are always provisional. You know, Mamba Negra, as much as it is an interesting space, let's say for in Sylvia Winter's terms, transvaluation. She uses transvaluation in Nietzsche's terms in the sense that aesthetic representations and forms, they can transvaluate an identity. And for this, she uses Public Enemy and Spike Lee to show like, well, you know, these aesthetic processes, they're actually dealing with the imposed social readings, and they're creating other ways out. They're creating new meanings, new aesthetic figures, which I think that like Roberta or even Lin now, they occupy for travestis. You know, it is an aesthetic figure in the sense that it creates an aesthetic word and presents you with aesthetic processes which you can employ for yourself as a way to also rewrite your identity. So I think it happens that, but also Mamba is very tied to a commercial circuit. It has to pay for itself. It also has to enter at it has to be recognized by the media and some institutions so it can circulate. So of course you can have like this space of fruition and experience where you can have actual changes, even though, and not like only momentary changes. People can have the aesthetic experience in the party, but you know, I know a lot of trans and non-white people that also got good jobs and paying and could come to São Paulo because of the party. So in this sense, we can say that the party is producing and redistributing things in different ways, and I think that some things can do that. I feel that the occupation, the strategic occupation of travestis and like marginalized identities of the art circuit can do that. You know, I think that the same is done in happen in hip hop culture with Black people occupying capitalist spaces of high consumption, of media, of becoming references to young people, but that is very provisional and stable. You know, we can always change because it is in the end determined by the market. It can make some changes, like and these changes can change from scale to scale, but it can be like cut out. You know, if you're at a moment it seems non-profitable or non-interesting to capitalism, the state can like cut of this. And I think that Bolsonaro was a good example, like at least culturally wise, how you can have like a lot of these advancements, which are just like cut out because the far right has organized itself institutionally to take it out. And like this is not to say that these initiatives shouldn't be done or are not effective. They are, but they have this limitation, which it is, I would say, it is capitalism itself. Like it can't possibly, it is not creating itself out of capitalism, right? It can reproduce itself out of capitalism. It could maybe, but it wouldn't be a party or a occupation of the art circuit. It would be something else.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting because then I feel like, say, taking as examples like what you said of like this sort of culture or practice of helping each other in trans spaces at this more like individual personal level, but also um some sort of like economic redistribution that goes on in Mamba. This all seems to me to point to interesting like perspectives on this more like economic experimentation that sort of happens apparently, I think in these spaces, which seems to be something else away and different from the sort of more state logic representation thing that I think it's
I think
politically.
it's like tying mode A, mode C without exactly bypassing mode B, as you were saying before, you know. Of course, that you can use mode B in some way, like you can get funds, you can get public funds to make a party or a festival or anything of the sort, but you're like more emphasizing on how you can recreate some of the logic of the mode A, of the internal trans space, into like a bigger structure. And I think this is very interesting. I agree with you, like this makes like aesthetic changes and forms, and like, you know, since we're talking about Mamba, it is like, to the credit to the creators of the party is that it changes how parties are done in the whole world. And I mean that of course goes through capitalist constraints and market constraints, but still it changed how people are partying, and we don't know the consequences of that. It can have far-reaching out consequences that can be both capitalized and commercialized, and can have like consequences that actually have political underpinnings too. So I think like this is a good way. And what I try to do with the CPT is like the same things, like, oh, let's make shirts, but also let's make these events where we can talk inside and outside academia, and let's link up with travestis that are militants, but are also musicians and actresses and politicians, and like trying to disseminate a similar political stance, which you need to find like a slogan or a phrase or a conviction, but still I think you can irradiate through a logic which is not confined only to the state logic. You can go beyond it, but like you have to circumvent it, like you're going from the outside inside, like you're making a spiral. You have to go from the borders so you get to the center, or you have to make a transversal cut, because, you know, getting out of these spaces, you don't have the thing which is interesting and very political. This is like you don't have the, you can't control the what is coming out, the output. You can control the output. You can like control the inputs, but you don't know what's coming out. And maybe that is interesting as a social process, right? Because you are dealing with different institutions and spaces and scales. So it is sad. Are we all tired, or you guys have any other questions?
Just giving a moment to see if anyone wants to ask anything. Yeah, but on my end, I think it's a longer conversation. There's a lot of stuff there. I hope you also present more often so we can, you know,
I'm gonna
hone
send
in
the
on specific
presentation and
things.
also make like the written drawn diagrams. I'm gonna make them with links so I can send to the group, and of course we can keep discussing it. I hope, like as I said, to make a sort of a gender nucleus or a reading group inside the STP, and I would like to make my presentation with other people. So I think I can come back to a more aligned presentation like in some months, maybe trying to answer some of the questions that you made me, because I think it was interesting today because we focused more in political and scalar questions, which are not usually the focus of people making these questions. You know, most of the talks people focus on more conceptual or specific questions, but I think that the most interesting thing that you can do if you're going to look at the travesty as a sort of model or a social process to be incorporated is exactly to think of these things that are on mode A and how they can get to mode C without necessarily going through a constriction of the state, even though you can strategically occupy the state, you also can think on other sort of provisory arrangements where these changes and production and distribution process can happen.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
Okay, guys, I think, well, that is usually the time we stop. But I'm how should I do it with the recording? Should I? Oh, I can upload it myself and then I'll share the link. And sorry,
Okay.
I hope there wasn't a furadeira noise in the background. I tried to.
No, no.
But yeah, it was crazy. Okay. Okay, guys. Then
Bye, guys. Thank you. Good night.
Bye bye. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.